Hello, my name is Tristan and this is Atlas RV, where we exclusively service and repair track trailer. In this video we're going to be having a closer look at Mark 5 rear deck faults. Three specific faults which we continue to see in nearly every Tvan, and something that we anticipate will happen ultimately to all Tvan unless it's addressed. Before we start though, I just want to acknowledge that this video is not endorsed by the manufacturer of track trailer, and the opinions in this video are all my own. Now, these three specific faults which we're talking about relate to Tvan manufactured from 2018 through to about mid-23. Track introduced two design changes at that point. One was in relation to this top bracket, which we'll have a closer look at shortly. That hinge, this lower interface between that main arm and that first deck. The third fault which we're going to discuss at this stage hasn't been addressed, but really easy to modify. Just helps reduce the chance of failure, something you can do at home without parts. The first one relates to this upper hinge. This is the junction between the first and second deck. This is when you're unfolding the deck to set up the tent. And I'll show you, I'll grab a pry bar and I'll show you what I mean. This is where the fasteners have physically failed. So they've started to stretch and the holes have opened up. And hopefully you can see that's pretty clear. This one's not bad, but it certainly needs attention. As it continues, those rivets just start to fall out essentially. Those holes start to open up and you just do more and more damage. So this is one that is worth addressing sooner rather than later, as all the faults are. What we do is we essentially just replace this component, which is flat, secured by 4 rivets, and this hinge bolt, which is just an M8 bolt with bracketry that wraps right around to give it extra security. Just a bit more purchase. And we replace this hinge bolt with a shoulder bolt. And I'll explain in another video why this fault occurs initially. Of course, it continues to get worse just through regular driving corrugations, but we'll also physically go through. I'll show you how we make that repair. The second fault relates to this interface between this arm and the rear deck, and I'll zoom in. I'll show you currently what we can see is just that tiny crack. Shortly we'll remove this side panel and I'll remove those rivets and we'll have a closer look, but ultimately that deck is cracked all the way through. And as that gets worse, we do get to a point that we can't really salvage the deck anymore. The deck needs to be replaced, and it's obviously very expensive and time consuming to order and replace that major component. The third fault is something that everyone can essentially address themselves, is in relation to a bracket that sits behind this panel. So what I'll do is I'll remove this panel and then we'll have a closer look inside. I've just removed that trim panel to reveal this bracket, this hinge assembly, and this is where the cracking which I was referring to occurs, and you can see I've drawn an arrow on there to identify where that cracking starts. And it very specifically starts in that sharp transition, sometimes referred to as a stress or a load riser. Cracking starts there and then runs all the way around. I've got an example of a previous one that we've replaced before, and you can see it starts right at that corner and then just runs all the way around. Of course, we've caught this one before. It's totally failed. But had it been addressed previously, it's possible it will never have cracked. And so, again, pretty easy. This is something we address on all Tvans during service here at Atlas RV, and we just simply open that up. Like drilling a hole at the end of a crack, we're essentially just relieving that stress riser. So you can use one of two tools. A rat's tail file. Most people will have a small rat's tail file, or just go down to Bunnings. They're very cheap, very affordable to buy, and we're just going to open this up. So we're going to change it from a really sharp corner into a nice round hole. I'm going to be using a die grinder because we're doing this very regularly on Tvan. So what I'll do is I'll put the camera down, I'll open this hole up, and I'll show you what it looks like once we're finished. So I've gone ahead and made that modification, and you should be able to clearly see a distinct difference between what I'd shown you earlier, that very sharp transition, to now a much more open, rounded transition. So at this stage, as far as we're concerned, this is modified. We don't expect to see cracking. Not to say it won't happen, but this is a really good step to ensure that we've reduced the chance, controlled that risk essentially. We've been doing this for 3 years, and so far we haven't seen a hinge crack after that modification. Just be aware this modification not endorsed by track. So again, if your van's under warranty, you do so at your own risk. So that's that one done. Again, something you can do at home with a rat's tail file. Pretty simple modification to what can be quite an expensive repair if it's not addressed early. This leads us on to another fault which we spoke about a little bit earlier. This is that cracking, and again, we can't see too much because it's still concealed behind this arm. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, remove this rear light bar, those 8 rivets. I'm going to pull this arm away from that deck. I'll show you closely that cracking. You'll see it clearly run all the way from front to back. And I'll show you which components we use to address that. And I'll explain what happens if it's not addressed, if it's allowed to continue. I've removed those 8 rivets, and that reveals that cracking which I was referring to earlier. You can see that's where we saw that tiny crack at the back. It does extend all the way through, nearly to the other side. This is very early stages, this van. It does get obviously substantially worse. Not addressed now, what happens, that crack continues through to the front side of the deck, or the top side. Those top rivets, they lose their tension, and the loaders then transition into this second pair. That begins to crack, and ultimately the bonding between the foam core and these outer skins starts to break down, and unfortunately once the deck starts to get floppy, our repair kit just doesn't address, or it doesn't repair that. And so at that point, unfortunately, you just need to replace that deck. The kit itself, this is one component. The kit's made up of quite a few parts. This is probably the key component though. If you have a close look, you can see that's manufactured from 1mm aluminium, quite a soft material. There are 2 layers to that, but this is manufactured from 2mm. It's 350 MPa steel. It's a very durable material. We go from 316 rivets to 1/4 inch rivets, much bigger, so it gives us a bit more clamping strength, but ultimately that transitions all the way around, securing both the front and the back and the sides. In about mid-23, track changed the design, and this part continued all the way around the back of the deck. And so we don't believe those vans are ever going to be a problem, but for the rest of them, they ultimately will all crack. And so if there's the opportunity, it's best to address this early. I'm going to go ahead and make another video. I'll release it at the same time, but it is going to, in a little bit more detail, explain the process for fitting this upper hinge. Also, how to try and stop it from happening in the first place, because that's pretty straightforward. And then, of course, this repair a little bit more complicated. It does require quite a few more tools and a little bit of general engineering competence. But I'll explain ultimately how to go ahead and make that repair. Thank you for bearing with me. I know this sniffling must be really annoying. I'm trying to get over influenza A at the moment. So thank you for bearing with me, and I'll see you in the next video.